That's the kind of thing that Manchester City or Liverpool would do. It's not the sort of thing that Tottenham would normally do.
Well, Jack, thanks very much for joining us. And we'll get stuck in straight away because Tottenham have been one of the most active Premier League clubs in the transfer window so far. As we have very clearly seen from the way they've promoted the Jed Spence signing, there are now 6 in through the door. We don't know if they're going to be done there. We'll come on to that in a bit. But who do you think is the most sort of eye-catching signing? Who might cause their opponents the most problems and make the biggest impact for Tottenham in the season and seasons ahead?
That's a really interesting question, David. It depends how you look at it, really. I think that Ivan Perisic is a fascinating signing in his own way because he represents a big departure from normal Tottenham Hotspur transfer policy. You know, Perisic is a fantastic player, but he's 33 years old. He's a great of the game. He's scored in a World Cup final for Croatia. He's had a stellar career at club level all across Europe. But Tottenham generally don't sign guys like this. So I was thinking earlier, the last time Tottenham signed a really senior, experienced, top-level player, one option is Fernando Llorente, who came in his 30s in 2017. If not him, you had to go all the way back to Edgar Davids joining the club. So it's not usual for Tottenham to sign someone of this much experience. So I think Perisic is fascinating. And the other signing who I think also represents a big change in policy for Tottenham is Richarlison. You know, I think Richarlison's a fantastic player. I'm really looking forward to watching him play for Spurs. But it's not normal that Spurs would spend that much money on someone who's not even a guaranteed first-team player. I think he'll play a lot of games this year, but I don't think he'll play every single game. I think he represents great depth, great options across that front line. But they've already got Harry Kane and Heung-min Son and Dejan Kulusevski in that front line. So signing a player for that much money who is depth, really, rather than a first choice, that's the kind of thing that Manchester City or Liverpool would do. It's not the sort of thing that Tottenham would normally do. So I think Richarlison also represents a big change in policy for Spurs.
Yeah, and they've certainly backed Antonio Conte massively with what he wanted, because there was a lot of speculation over whether he might be leaving the club this summer if he didn't get the signings that he wanted to. There was talk of sort of 5-6 signings, and that's what's happened so far. Personally, I'm going to pick out Bissouma because every time I've seen him play, he seems to light up the stage. Most notably, you could say, at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium last season, where he ran the show for Brighton and Hove Albion. Also, I'm really intrigued to see Jed Spence because he caught the eye of the wider public in the FA Cup run that Nottingham Forest had last season when he was on loan. Is he the real deal? Can he do it at one of the biggest clubs in England? Talking of Spence, he's been the subject of some pretty interesting comments from Conte, who has suggested quite clearly that this is a club signing as opposed to his individually. So are we looking at a situation here where it's Conte driving overall recruitment? It's Fabio Paratici? It's Daniel Levy? Tell us a little bit more about who holds the power in that recruitment operation.
Well, David, it's all three, really. I mean, you know, Tottenham is a club where Daniel Levy clearly is a hugely influential figure continually on the football side. I know that when Paratici came in last year, there was a sense that maybe Levy would be stepping back from the football side of the club and letting Paratici run the football side of the club. That's not really been the case. You know, it was Daniel who drove the appointment of Antonio Conte in November of last year. Daniel Levy has continued to be active, you know, in the January transfer window and in this summer window. That's not to say that Paratici and Conte are powerless. You know, Paratici has been driving a lot of the deals himself. Richarlison, for example, is a signing which I think all three of them were on board with. He was a Levy signing and a Conte signing and a Paratici signing. Perisic, clearly a player who Conte had worked with at Inter. There were other players they looked at who Conte had previous with, like Alessandro Bastoni from Inter, who they didn't end up getting. But clearly, Conte has some scope to come up with targets of his own. Equally, there are other players who might be more of a Paratici target or perhaps more of a Levy target. Overall, I mean, you know, with recruitment, you never know how it's going to work out until the season starts. But I do think that having three people pushing recruitment like Tottenham have had this summer has worked out pretty well so far.
one of the most sort of notable features of this transfer window for Tottenham is that they've got business done early. It was pointed out to me by someone from inside the club as being a real surprise, because we've seen so many transfer windows go down to deadline day, with Tottenham sort of wheeling and dealing to get in what they need or what they want, sometimes succeeding, sometimes not. But my goodness, they've set their stall out with some very, very heavy recruitment right from the start. Perhaps that was in part to prepare them for their preseason tour, so that Conte had pretty much his full complement to be working with in preseason training. Spence coming a little bit later, but this is a departure, right?
Yeah, I talked earlier in the context of Richarlison about how this is a different Tottenham, a different Daniel Levy, and you can certainly see this in the timing of the signings they've done this summer. This is not normal Tottenham policy to get all these guys. They started signing players in May. We've still got they've got 6 players in now. We've still got 3 weeks until the season starts, David. So in that sense, this is a big change from Spurs. I remember. Do you remember the summer of 2012? Where they sold Luka Modric to Real Madrid. And on the last night of the transfer window, they were desperately trying to bring in João Moutinho as Modric's replacement. They couldn't get the paperwork done in time. And they ended up going into the 2012-13 season without the guy that they wanted to play in central midfield. It's crazy, really, looking back on it. Even 3 years ago, do you remember when they were going for Paulo Dybala? Yes. On the final night of the window, and they weren't able to do it. They were going for Bruno Fernandes. They went for Bruno Fernandes at the end of the window. They weren't able to get him either, and he ended up going to Manchester United the following window. So look, Spurs have struggled with this in the past. They've had a policy often of trying to sell first, then buy at the end of the window. Sometimes it's worked out, sometimes it hasn't. So for them to be going to be aggressive and proactive in the market in May and June and early July, to have 6 signings in ready for the first team by the middle of July, this is a big change in policy from Tottenham.
Now, you mentioned Modric, Moutinho there, which reminded me of creative midfielders. And that leads us nicely on to the next subject, which is whether Tottenham will still do more business before the transfer window closes. And one of the positions they've been most heavily linked with, if they're going to do that, is that playmaker type role. We know that they made an inquiry for Christian Eriksen to scope out what he would have wanted to come back. It didn't materialize, as my understanding. He wanted a contract length and size financially that was probably not what Tottenham were looking to do, and he has ended up at Manchester United. There have been rumours about James Maddison. That appears to be an area of the field where we might just see someone come in before the window shuts.
Yeah, I think this is really the one missing piece to the Tottenham squad is, what if they want to play a different way? If they want to play the 3-4-3, I don't think they really need James Maddison. They've got 4 fantastic central midfielders. They've got very good options in the front line. But if Conte decides, as he did a few times last season, they want the extra midfielder, they want to play a 3-5-2, try and unpick the opposition that way, then maybe it would make sense under those circumstances to go for another number 10. I'm old enough to remember when Tottenham tried to sign James Maddison from Coventry City or from Norwich City. So he's clearly been on the Tottenham Hotspur radar a very, very long time. I can just about see why it would work out for them this summer. I don't think, clearly he's not top of the list, or wasn't top of the list at the start of the summer, but equally there would be a lot of upside if they were able to pull it off. That said, they've got some good creative midfielders at the moment they're trying to get rid of. Tanguy Ndombele and Giovanni Lo Celso are good players. Neither of them went on the tour to Korea. Clearly, the club would like to find alternative solutions for those 2 guys. Maybe if they can move them on, then they've got the space to push for a new number 10 coming in. But I think I feel like they're now at the kind of the departures phase of the window, having brought in 6 players already.
And all of that begs the question, Jack, is this a Tottenham now that is ready to compete with the likes of Liverpool and Manchester City? Do they have a squad that's capable of coping with the rigours of Premier League, Champions League every single week for a lot of the season?
I think it's going to be very difficult to keep pace with Liverpool and Manchester City on all fronts all season, just because, even last season, I thought Tottenham were fantastic in the second half of the season, but they were playing once a week. And that's easier to do than playing twice a week, which is what they're going to have to do this year. So that a big question mark for me is, can they maintain the freshness and intensity twice a week in the Premier League and the Champions League. That said, I think they were the third best team in the country for the second half of last season, even though Chelsea finished the season ahead of them in the Premier League table. I think that the gap between Tottenham and then Liverpool and City will get smaller this year. I would expect Tottenham to have their best Premier League season since the peak season under Mauricio Pochettino, when of course they got 86 points in 2016-17. I think Tottenham should target that this year. Will it be enough to win the Premier League? Well, I think it would need City and Liverpool to both have an off year for Spurs to win the league. I think it's probably unlikely that Spurs would do that. But I think they will have a very good season and exert a bit of pressure on the big two.